So does it look good, Thomas? Okay. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I am Joanne Hampton, Smith County Commissioner for Precinct 4. For the last several years, we have been working with the Behavioral Health Leadership Team and our Criminal Justice Coordinating Committee, discussing mental health issues within our community and our jails. Tonight, we have with us, to my right, Wayman Stewart, who is the CEO of the Andrews Center, Chief Deputy John Shoemaker with the Smith County Sheriff's Office. To my left, we have Gary Pinkerton, who is our Smith County Pretrial Services Director and our Criminal Justice Coordinator. We also have Thomas Wilson with our Smith County District Attorney's Office, the Civil Division. And also from the Andrews Center, we have with us Jennifer Graham, who is the Forensic Director for Mental Health. At this time, and we want to break down, what we want to do tonight is break down our jail procedures for when an inmate who has mental health issues is booked into our jail or out of our jail. We want to talk about the Sandra Bland Act and where you need to turn when this happens to someone you love. We will also discuss our AOT court, which is Assisted Outpatient Treatment Court. At the end of the presentation, we will open up our phone lines for questions. And I just want to make sure you understand we will not be speaking on any specific cases or individuals. At this time, I'm going to ask Wayman Stewart with the Andrews Center to introduce himself and tell us a little bit about him.
Good afternoon. I'm Wayman Stewart, Executive Director of the Andrews Center. And Andrews Center is the local mental health authority for this area. I'm Wayman Stewart with the Andrews Center. I'm the Executive Director. And we are one of 39 community centers in the state of Texas. And we serve 5 counties, Henderson County, Rains County, Emory, Van Zandt, and Smith County as we are today. And so we serve as a local mental health authority for this 5-county area.
Chief Deputy Shoemaker.
Yes, Chief Deputy Shoemaker, Smith County Sheriff's Office. Been with the Sheriff's Office for 17 years. Been over the jail approximately 5 years. I'm the jail administrator and conduct random checks of our mental health inmates that we have come inside the Smith County Jail.
Thank you. Chief Gary.
Gary Pinkerton, Director, Smith County Pretrial.
Turn your mic on. Pull it close to you.
Gary Pinkerton, Director, Smith County Pretrial. Prior to pretrial, I spent 28 years at the Smith County Sheriff's Office. I was the jail administrator for over 17 years, and I do work close with the mental health, and so that's why I'm here.
Mr. Wilson.
Thomas Wilson with the Smith County DA's office. Work under Jacob Putman, the elected DA. I have a unique role in the Smith County DA's office because I have 2 functions. First and foremost, I'm a prosecutor, and as a prosecutor, my job is to see that justice is done in all cases, whether that be civil or criminal cases. Then secondly, I act as general counsel for the county, representing Smith County elected officials, department heads, in all civil legal matters, including the Commissioner's Court. And then most importantly, and the most relevant here today, is I represent the state in all civil commitment proceedings here in Smith County. So I see all aspects of the criminal issues relating to mental health and all of the approaches, and it's a unique perspective that I bring, as well as all the other members of this this body here bring today, so that we can discuss these issues and move them forward.
Let's just jump right into our criminal justice issues and with mental health. As most of us know, the criminal justice system or the mental health system has not been overhauled in the last 50 years, and that's from the federal right on down to the county level. And we know that there are people out there that are concerned about their loved ones and the fact that they end up in our Smith County jail. And I guess the question is, you know, where does someone go when they actually need mental health services? We've discussed this in BHLT, and a lot of people say, well, we don't know who to turn to or who to call or what agency that can really help us. So I'm hoping tonight we will be able to answer some of those questions. And Mr. Stewart, I'm going to start with you. Does the Andrews Center provide mental health services to those incarcerated in our Smith County jail?
Yes, we do. And there's a daily database that comes to the Andrews Center from the state that's when a person's incarcerated. And if those people a person's already a client of Andrews Center, we will contact the jail and vice versa. We'll provide continuity of care, medication, other services that person needs. Also, if there's someone in jail that's in danger of psychosis, we have a staff that will come down and do an assessment on them. And we have a hotline also that you can call at any time.
Thank you. Chief Deputy Shoemaker, so what happens when an inmate comes into Smith County Jail and we know that they have mental issues, or we don't know that they have mental issues? What do we do?
First off, when they come to the jail, they're subject to a suicide screen-in. Just suicide screen-in is it deals with mental health issues, asks mental health questions when they're screened into the jail. They are, depending on how they answer those questions, is what direction they go next. If they answer some of those questions as relating to mental health issues, they are referred to Valerie, who is our mental health nurse there at the jail. She evaluates everyone that has questions on there that is not answered, that is answered as maybe having a background of mental health. We also run a CCQ, which Wayman just pointed on. That is a continuity of care. If they've ever received any mental health help outside of in an outside agency as an Andrews Center, it will notify us that they've received that help, and they are referred to a mental health nurse that we have there at the jail also.
So if someone comes in and they answer those questions, but they don't put down there that they've had any type of mental health issues, and maybe they don't come up in your query,
Yes, ma'am.
but they have had some, but it's just not showing up, what do you do?
We still evaluate that inmate. We still have them screened in medically. Every inmate that comes into our jail is screened in medically, and medical asks those questions again, just in a different way, to point out any of those deficiencies they might have during their answers as far as mental health goes that way.
Okay, so we've done the screening. We know they have some mental health issues. They've been through to the medical facility and all of that. So do you place them in just a regular cell with everybody else, or do you place them by themselves? What do you do with them?
It depends on the behavior of that inmate. If they have violent tendencies or anything like that, it's due to the safety and security of the inmates and the safety and security of our jail that they might be placed, if they are violent, that they might be placed in a cell by themselves to protect them, to protect our staff, to protect the other inmates that's in the jail. If they do not display any of those actions, then they are placed in general population and followed up by medical staff in reference to their mental health.
Can you basically tell us what's the average number of times where an inmate has to wait for a forensic bed?
On a non-aggravated charge, the approximate wait time for an inmate, this is pre-COVID, an approximate wait time for an inmate is 3 months. On an aggravated charge with an inmate, the approximate wait time is 1 year.
Now, is that before they go to court, or is that just in general?
That is after they go to court.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Pinkerton, what does pretrial release or the personal bond office have to do with mental health?
The pretrial release office, we have 2 certified mental health peace officers, and what we do, we work with the county courts, county court of law 1, 2, and 3. When they have someone that may have mental health issues on their caseload, what they'll do sometimes ask us to go out and do an assessment of them and see how they're doing. We also work with the jail to assist in getting inmates to the Andrews Center if necessary. One of the things I do is each morning I come in and look at the roster to see who's in jail, and depending on the nature of the charges, I look at the affidavit, and if I think they may have some mental health issues, I'll call and talk to the booking staff and just verify if the Andrews Center's been contacted. If not, we'll try to reach out to get that person seen by Andrews Center if it's necessary. And then the third thing we do is if the person is bondable, we will go interview them and talk to the judge and see if the possibility to put them in the pretrial release program to get them out of jail, so that won't be in custody, to where we can make sure to get to the Andrews Center and get their medications.
And Mr. Stewart, when they're sent over to the Andrews Center, if they're bonded out, what exactly does the Andrews Center do, and how do you do a continuity of care?
If they're bonded out, they go through the regular process, and many times they're already clients of ours, and we just go ahead and schedule appointments with them, and even sometimes when a person get incarcerated, they have an appointment up in Commons, as Officer Shoemaker mentioned. We contact them, but once they get bonded out, we just put them on the regular regime, either with case management, and Jennifer might have some more things that they do also with the forensic department at Andrews Center.
Ms. Graham?
Well, in the forensic division, it's a little bit different because at that point, they've already been in contact with the court, and they're in one situation, they may have been deemed incompetent to stand trial. So at that point, if they're eligible for bond, the court has ordered them to receive services for restoration. So that's one of the examples in forensics that we could do for them. But whether they've been court ordered or, like as Mr. Pinkerton mentioned, if it's just part of their pretrial release program, anyone's welcome to come to the Andrews Center for that initial screening and assessment to see what services they are eligible for.
Help me understand. We keep saying forensic. Is that a misdemeanor? Is that criminal? I mean, what is that? What do you mean when you say forensic beds?
When I say forensic, I'm referring to that there's a criminal charge pending. So in this situation, we're looking at someone that possibly has a mental health condition, and they're involved in the criminal justice system at this time.
Mr. Wilson, can you help us a little bit? Because it may be just walking or something.
Yeah, under Texas law, there are really two mechanisms in the criminal realm how individuals are hospitalized to address their mental health needs. So the first one, it's called a 46B commitment, and so that refers to 46B of the Code of Criminal Procedure. And what that is the mechanism by which an individual who has a mental health issue, a serious mental health illness, and the courts recognize that, the DA's office recognizes that, and the court and the individual's attorney recognizes it, and they go to the court and say, this person is unable to assist in their defense. This person, because of their mental illness, cannot proceed forward. And under the Texas Constitution and the U.S. Constitution, certain rights are guaranteed, and that includes a fair trial. And so in order for you to be able to participate in that fair trial, we have to get you to the point to where you can be represented and you can represent a defense. And so the 46B commitment is the process by which the court orders the individual to be hospitalized so that they can be restored to that capacity to represent themselves. The second and less common instance is a 46C commitment, and that's not really a forensic issue as much as it is it's the people, you've probably heard of the common theme of or statement that, they were found not guilty by reason of insanity. That is your 46C commitment. That is where individuals have been deemed to be seriously mentally ill. They have a valid defense in that they did not understand the nature of the offense that occurred at the time that they committed that crime. So while we're not saying they did not commit the crime, it is a defense that they did not know they were committing the crime. So at that point, the court will then determine that they are, in fact, a danger to themselves or others, and that they need to be hospitalized to the point that they can be released back to society. And so those are the two criminal mental health commitments that we deal with on a daily basis here in Smith County and across the state.
Okay, so I'm a mother, and all of a sudden I have a child that has been diagnosed with, say, a schizophrenic disorder or some type of psychosis or something. And that person, I'm worried about him, and he's angry, and he's yelling, and he's screaming, and I feel like he's going to hurt himself or hurt someone else. So I call, say, Tyler PD, and I tell them what's going on. Well, I don't really get any response from them. So then I maybe call the sheriff's office, and I'm still not getting any help, and I don't know what to do, and I'm so afraid that this child is going to hurt someone or hurt themselves. What do I do?
So there are several ways which the Andrews Center, the sheriff's office, the courts can help, and even private facilities can help these individuals get the services they need. So if it is a crisis situation, if the person is a danger to themselves or others, if they are, acting suicidal or homicidal, then they can be taken to the hospital by law enforcement. So that's one way. You can call law enforcement. You can call the Andrews Center Crisis Hotline, and they can assist as well. You can also, even in certain instances, contact the county court, and they can provide you with the mechanisms by which you can obtain a peace officer's warrant to pick that person up. I'm sorry, not a peace officer's warrant, an emergency detention warrant to pick that person up and take them to the hospital to be evaluated. And those are typically our civil commitment processes, which are not governed under the criminal realm like the 46B and the 46C, but they're governed under the Health and Safety Code. And so those are a few of the mechanisms. I know that the Andrews Center may have some other ideas on how to effectuate the resources available and get them to the person that needs them the most. So,
Mr. Stewart, do you have any other ideas of how I could get help?
Yeah, one thing he mentioned, crisis hotline, that's 877-934-2131. 877-934-2131. And we are basically open Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, but the hotline is accessible 24/7. So as Mr. Wilson has said, call the hotline if you feel like you need somebody, if there's a crisis, something going on.
Okay.
and we also have, I forget to mention, there's 211,
Right.
which is a statewide program that provides local community resources wherever you are in the state of Texas. So if you have an issue and it may not be an emergency where you want to call 911, then 211 may be an option to help you find those resources, and I believe that's put on by United Way, and they provide the funding for that. There are some other programs that we've discussed through the BHLT before to kind of assist law enforcement in furthering resources for the community, but there's also programs out there nationwide that are good models that we can take that may not be a one-size-fits-all, but that we can use to further that. And, if we could, if you are having problems with, getting answers, I think we discussed this earlier, going up the chain of command. Go to your city councilman, go to your mayor, go to your commissioner, and all commissioners, go to commissioner's court and speak. And all individuals have the ability to access their government officials on a daily basis, and they should, if they feel that they're not getting their problems addressed.
I am so glad you said that, because you know what? I had someone call me in the middle of the night about their child that was having problems. They just didn't know what to do, and I could hear the child in the background and the language that was being used. And so what I did is I called my constable and asked him to go and help that family out. And he took that person over to University Park at that time to try to get him some help. But once he got there, he was able to sign himself back out. So even though we take him, we do all those, we go through all those steps, what happens when that person signs himself back out? He's not on his medication because the medication makes him feel weird. What do? How do we help our citizens learn how to cope with a person with a behavioral issue? Anyone?
I'd like to address that. There's a support group that's called NAMI, National Alliance for the Mentally Ill, and there's a local group also here. And a lot of times when people don't know what to do with somebody that they suspect that have a mental illness, NAMI has so many different support groups. They have so many different trainings, family to family, even have training for veterans. I think they are a great resource that's underutilized in our communities. And when you can't get to the Andrews Center or your local law enforcement, as Mr. Wilson said, call NAMI. And there's a lot of families who've been through a lot of traumatic things with their children, loved ones, and they're there to support us in this community with mental illness.
Thank you. So we also know that in the last couple of years or so, we've heard about people being stopped on the highway, booked into our jails, they commit suicide, or officer comes up and he sees someone that's very combative and they can't control them, and that person either ends up being killed or something happens to them. And while we don't want that to happen here in Smith County, we know what's out there is called the Sandra Bland Act. So, Mr. Pinkerton, can you talk to us a little bit about the Sandra Bland Act and how it came about and what all needs to take place there?
Well, the Senator Bland Act came to be after a traffic stop was down in the outskirts of Houston, and a young lady was booked into the county jail, and then went through the screening process. And during the screening process, the booking staff missed some key indicators, and one of the indicators was she had suffered postpartum depression, and she was crying. And one of the things that they train you in jail school, and part of your training, is there are little telltale signs that you must watch for when you're booking a person in. And so they booked her in, and when you're from out of town and you're calling somebody, you can't get hold to anybody, it's hard. And so she was there, couldn't get in contact with anybody, and who she kept calling didn't answer at the time, so he finally answered. And so basically, she was in the cell, and she did commit suicide. And so the jail found non-compliance because of some of the things that were not done properly. And so with that being said, the Senator Bland Act was signed into law on June 15, 2017. And with that bill being signed, it also indicated that additional training was needed for the jail staff and also for patrol and general de-escalation. Is when you pull somebody over, how to de-escalate a situation as opposed to get into a scuffle. There's a lot of times you just got to use good practice and remain calm. And so basically, a lot of people have seen the video, and the officer got upset pretty quickly about the cigarette smoke coming out of the car, and he did arrest her, which actually should have been a citation. And so the laws have changed in the state of Texas, and it's required that now that when a person goes to jail and they have any signs of suspected of having mental disabilities or mental illness, you have 12 hours to notify, the sheriff has 12 hours to notify the magistrate in writing that person has a situation. And so at that point in time, if a PR bond can be granted, if it's a misdemeanor, if the person is able to bond out of jail, it's good. But if it's a felony case, well, if that person has some issues, they're going to call the Andrews Center and have them seen. And if it's a felony case, they may have to go to a competency hearing. And even though they're going to the competency hearing, the jail has medical staff there that's prepared to treat that person. And not every jail as big as Smith County is able to have 24-hour medical care. And so we do. But one of the things you got to keep in mind, and I always say, and I have a son, he's 22, and I tell him, if you get pulled over, first of all, just comply. You need to comply with the officer's telling you. And if you feel that the officer is mistreating you, I said 100 times, you cannot try the case on the side of the road. You be calm, and then there's a grievance process with the sheriff's office, Tyler PD, DPS. Any law enforcement agency has a process for you to file a complaint. And so on the side of the road is not the time to file your complaint. And I hear this from other parents, well, they did comply and they did get killed. You know, I can't speak for that officer and what he done, but that's why we have to train our kids up to give respect, you get respect. And if you're being mistreated, well, then go down and file your complaint. But there have been some laws changed, and one of the laws is requiring that every peace officer in the state of Texas must have additional training in crisis intervention training. They must have additional training in de-escalation techniques. Also, when you're pulled over, you have to file racial profiling information, and that goes to the state. And anytime there's a use of force at a traffic stop, you're required to send it in to the Attorney General's office for a review. So those are some of the things that happened as a result of the Senator Bland Act, but it did add a lot of training for law enforcement in Texas.
Okay, you said training. What type of training are we talking about? How many hours is it? Can you expound on that?
Well, it's 40 hours of training as far as interpersonal communication skills. It's 16 hours as far as crisis intervention. And so each jailer has to take crisis intervention now. Used to you did not, but now you do. And so it's basically training just to better educate the officers on the telltale signs, what to look for, and how to communicate with people that have mental issues and those that don't. But we will see that a lot of people that you deal with in having mental illness normally is going to be because of a drug situation, to where they have psychosis, they have mental disorders, and some are bipolar. So those are some of the things that you deal with on the street.
So do you think that most of our officers have enough training when it comes to dealing with people with mental or behavioral issues? Anyone?
I believe that every officer has enough training. I believe there's more that could be done for officers to get them more training on different type of scenarios that could come up. It's how the officer handles the scenario that's presented to them is how everything goes from there. And like Pinkerton said, I do. We do undergo training there in the jail. We just did a suicide prevention class in November and December for every person in our jail. That implemented a little bit of the Sandra Bland Act into that training. Everybody underwent 8 hours of that training in 2019 or late 2019 to help with us understanding suicide prevention, understanding mental health, and understanding the Sandra Bland Act and what we have to do to comply with that.
And one of the things that I would kind of stress is we put a lot on our law enforcement officers every day. They're having to go out, make traffic stops. We ask them to keep the public safe. Then on top of that, we ask them to deal with people who are in psychotic episodes, who aren't facing reality, not because they're on drugs sometimes, or because they actually have a mental illness that needs to be addressed. And one of the things that law enforcement does well is when they interact with people with a mental illness sometime, for the most part, and I see this on a daily basis, they do what needs to be done. They usually will take them to the hospital. But unfortunately, you mentioned this earlier, is the fact is when they get to the hospital, law enforcement has to sit with them for 3, 4, 8, even up to 12 hours while they're being processed through on the commitment end. So that is one aspect of it. We ask law enforcement to be social workers. We ask them to be cops. We ask them to be drug counselors. We ask them to be a lot. One thing that we can do as a community is look at other alternatives than having law enforcement respond to mental health cases directly. Sometimes law enforcement needs to respond to those cases. Sometimes you just cannot handle an individual, their psychosis, their drug addiction has gone so far that it's not going to be helped unless they are detained and taken to the hospital physically. But there are programs, and there's a program that has been in the news lately out of Eugene, Oregon called CAHOOTS, and that stands for Crisis Assistance Helping Out on the Streets. And essentially, they have licensed social workers who are trained in de-escalation tactics that take pressure off of law enforcement and allow that individual to get the help they need and to find the resources available and even to get some counseling. And I think Jennifer can touch on this. I believe you're a licensed counselor, if I'm not mistaken. So you have techniques in your bag that you can use to allow people to get to understand the reality at that time so that they can get treatment, even if they're not on their medications. With that being said, there are going to be times where law enforcement's going to have to be involved. So that's not a one-size-fits-all, but that is something that we could use locally that would help take a lot of the pressure off law enforcement, but there's a price tag to that.
Well, of course.
And so we have to be willing to understand that the price tag associated with a program like that will be exponentially less than housing someone who's mentally ill in the jail. So, and I don't know if Ms. Graham can comment on kind of either her or any of her staff's ability to participate in a program like that, or even if that is something that would be feasible here locally.
Well, I haven't seen a design for that at this time, but I would say that in terms of any type of intervention, the earlier the intervention, the more successful it's going to be. So regardless of what that issue is or the trigger with that. So if, I do agree, as long as we're looking at other alternative programs to help connect them to treatment sooner, we're more likely to see a more positive outcome.
And I think that falls right into the category of what if a person is mentally or emotionally unable to comply? I mean, then we have to, well, I don't even know if they still use straitjackets or, what do they do when you run up on someone like that you just can't help them? There's nothing you can do, and we don't want to see them hurt. And I think that's where someone like a social worker may come into play.
For instance, at the Andrews Center, we are trained in verbal de-escalation techniques, and that is what we're looking for. But we want to look at it on a broader scope, like what are the triggers to that event? What are the ways that we can desensitize that episode? What is bringing that on? What's making it worse? So absolutely, there are things that clinicians do have training in that they're looking for methods to get to, how to solve that problem. How did we get here? How can we resolve this current crisis? But it's not just about how to get them out the door today. It's about how to keep them coming back, how to keep them invested in treatment so that they want to pursue it on their own. And it's not, so much an arm twist from a family member or, a supervisor or a probation officer, whoever it may be, that we want mental health treatment in society to be something that people would want to pursue, like for any other kind of medical condition. So part of that is addressing the stigma that we're faced with locally and everywhere, in terms of it's okay to get help, and I think that's part of the resistance people have when it's needed.
Okay, thank you for that. Yes, go right ahead.
I want to add to what Thomas was saying in reference to the police officer responding to the situations. As a police officer, you're responding to a situation where you're thrown into the crisis when you don't really know what's going on. You get there, you have note calls. It's on a dispatcher too to get as much information from the person that's calling in reference to the crisis that's going on, and the person giving as much information to the dispatcher as they can get before the officer arrives on scene, so we have that knowledge of what's going on there. But you're taking a police officer who has had some training in mental health and also training in how somebody acts in reference to being in some kind of being intoxicated by some type of controlled substance. Sometimes those people act the same way. Sometimes those people come across the same way as being someone that has a mental health issue when they're actually intoxicated on a controlled substance. And we're, as police officers, we're thrown into that situation where we have to decipher what's going on with whether this is a mental health crisis or whether this is someone that is intoxicated on that controlled substance. And it's not easy for us to decipher that sometimes. Sometimes we have to detain a suspect, figure out what's going on with that suspect, and then determine from there. So it's not easy to make those determinations on that split-second decision.
Thank you.
Commissioner, can I say
Yes,
something
go
on
right
this?
ahead.
Also, we're talking about mental health today, but there's another category of people that have intellectual developmental disabilities, which used to be called mental retardation. And the training that I've heard primarily for officers is really on mental health services and people with mental illness. But this category of people, there are sometimes they might look as if they're intoxicated, act that way or whatever. And that's another group that, again, we've got to put some focus on. We serve the IDD population, that's the acronym, as well as mental health. So that population can get lost and they can look like somebody with a mental health issue, but it really could be an intellectual developmental disability person who really can't communicate. They're acting strangely and different. So there's another population that's kind of forgotten out there.
Thank you. I guess my question is, and we want to make sure that we get all the information out possible to the public. But, Mrs. Stewart, when you get an inmate that's placed on a clearinghouse or waiting list for a psych hospitalization, how long does that normally take, and what is all that about?
That could take quite a while because on the waiting list right now, as of yesterday, for non-felony, there was 641 inmates waiting to get into a psych hospital. And I think Chief Shoemaker talked about the forensic side a few minutes ago, but that could take quite some time. He said, I think, even up to a year or more.
Wow.
We just don't have enough psych beds for the people that need them.
And to that point, you know, in Smith County, we have what's called a catchment area, and that is a term that is used in this mental health realm as the area in which the hospital beds are allocated for us. So those are all state-funded beds. There are a few private facilities, but for the most part, those facilities aren't able to take individuals who are uninsured or individuals who are receiving government assistance. And so what you wind up having is you have beds that are overcrowded. For instance, in Russ State Hospital, which the catchment area for Russ State Hospital starts at Texarkana, goes all the way down to Beaumont. So you're talking about every single county that encompasses from Texarkana to Beaumont and a little further east, further to Van Zant County, they all go to Russ State Hospital. They have, as of, I believe it was 2015, and I think these numbers are still in place, 325 beds for that entire area. They also split that between about 70% and 30% between forensic and civil. So here locally, we were fortunate in 2013 to get UT Health Northeast to obtain 34 beds that we can use, and some of those are Andrews Center specific beds that can be sent over, but that's only 34 beds. So if you think about it, we have a population based on the 2010 census, which, by the way, if you haven't done your census, do it, because this affects this. We have approximately 32,751 people in Smith County. Generally speaking, statistically, you have about 1% of the population has bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. That roughly works out to about 4,000 to 5,000 persons in Smith County that have a serious mental illness. Now, not everyone's going to need a hospital bed at one time, but you're talking about 34 beds for over 5,000 people. The numbers in the mental health cases that we get a year average around 3 to 4 mental health cases per week that come into our office that I sign off on. And so that means that those people are in serious crisis and they need help, and they wind up waiting in the ER for days. They wind up waiting in the hospital for days, and it's not the fault of the hospital. It's not the fault of the Andrews Center. It's not even really the fault of the state hospital system. It's a lack of beds, and that is a legislative issue that if the number one thing that anybody can do is talk to their legislature, and Ms. Graham hit on it earlier today, the most important thing is to talk about this and to get all of this information out there, because if we're not talking about it, then the legislature's not talking about it. And if the legislature's not talking about it, then there's no money coming that way. And so that is a key factor that we need to consider when moving this forward.
And we do know that our legislature is aware of these issues with mental illness and behavioral issues. Now, whether they do anything about it or not, they are aware of it. We've had some grants to come down. Wayman, can you tell us how much money we've had to come down as far as the grants are concerned, or have we had any lately? I know we used a little bit to start our AOT court.
Yes, the AOT court started, about a year ago? I know Mr. Wilson's very involved in it. I'm thinking it's right at $1 million for about 6 or 5 years, I think it is.
I think so, yes.
Yeah, and that's 30 people per year, some of the more sick people that really, really need following very closely by our judge and Mr. Wilson's assistance. But that has come down. I think this year we're going to have a big problem because, well, when I look at this, 2022, Russ State Hospital get a new hospital. Austin State Hospital, a new hospital, and San Antonio get a new hospital. Those hospitals are already, as he said right there, when they open in 2022, they are already full. So there's really no relief coming down from the beds. And if you've been hearing what I've heard, I think COVID-19 is going to take a lot out of the legislature this year as far as where the dollars are going. So I don't see a lot of relief in the near future, but we just keep plugging away.
We've talked about what's known as the black robe effect, and it kind of comes with the AOT court. Mr. Wilson, you want to talk about that a little bit?
So that's a program that has actually been around for a while now. It started in a lot of the major communities, Dallas, Tarrant County, Bexar County, Galveston County, Harris County, and it's transitioned really into even a lot of the smaller counties. And what it is, it's the Assistive Outpatient Treatment Program, or COURT. And what they do is individuals who are in the civil commitment process, and even some people who have gone through the 46B commitment process, they transition out of hospitalization, because what we don't want is we don't want mass long-term hospitalization. That's hard on everyone. That's hard on the patient. That's hard on the hospitals. It's hard on the community. What we want is we want community-based care. And so this is an alternative to long-term hospitalization for individuals who meet a certain criteria, who are able to function, but maybe need a little bit of help. And what we've done through that court, I think we've had at least 3 or 4 people, 5 people, I think, graduate through, and we've taken them from people who were living in a shed in somebody else's property with no belongings to now this individual has an apartment of his own. He's able to function independently. He was arrested 4 times for criminal trespass at the same location, and so it has taken people like that, but it is a community effort. So the Andrews Center works really hard. They have a team, and UT Health Northeast works really hard, and they have a team that really kind of sits down and this is going to be the treatment plan for this person. This is what we're going to do, and they follow through. And with Judge Moran's help and Judge Moran's guidance, and maybe sometimes a little bit of saying you're going to do it, then these people get the message that there's people here to support me and to get me through this process. So that's what really the black robe effect is. It is the judge coming down when they need to be difficult and when they say you're going to do it because I'm a judge and I have the authority to order you to do that. But it's also for the judge to be there and say, you're doing great, well done, let's move forward, let's pick up this progress, let's move forward. I mean, we've, in that program alone, I believe 2 or 3 people that are in there now have successfully gotten jobs. Even in this environment, they've gotten jobs and they're working towards moving forward. We're not going to be successful in every case, but it is something that I'm very proud of, that this court, that Judge Moran has done and that the Andrews Center has done, worked hard to move that along.
Thank you. And as we start to wind down, we have some questions from the Facebook, and I believe we also have someone online. I'm going to take the 2 Facebook questions first. And it says, many teachers who deal with children with behavioral issues are trained in a safe restraints. Would that be a viable solution, Wayman or Thomas or John?
I'm not familiar with the safe restraints, so I'm not.
I mean,
Jennifer?
I'm not familiar with it also.
I'm not familiar with it. Perhaps that's something that's specific to educators. I mean, there are multiple different aggression de-escalation programs that clinicians are typically trained in the community mental health setting. So maybe that's something similar for teachers that we do on the clinical side, and maybe we just call it something else. However, I would like to point out that, the goal of mental health treatment is, that, least restrictive environment. So if if they're verbally escalated, I'm not coming at them with the bear hug. It's meeting them where their needs are and not going above that, because then I'm just creating a hierarchy that doesn't need to be there for them. So I'm not familiar with that, but there are things that, yes, that clinicians do use that maybe perhaps that are similar to that, but it's only really if it's in extreme circumstances.
And I think the one thing to remember across the board, whether it's the criminal or the civil setting, is not all individuals with mental illness are violent. Not all violent people are mentally ill, just like not all criminals are mentally ill, and not all mentally ill people are criminals. So we have to understand that we have to meet the person where they're going to be, and that's not going to be a one-size-fits-all approach. It's going to require a community initiative from everybody getting together, whether it's a respite home, a one-stop shop for individuals to go to get treatment in a crisis situation. That's what the BHLT is working towards. Or it's it's a program like Cahoots that can get law enforcement out of the mental health world and back to policing and back to making sure that our streets are safe.
And I think that's the number one thing, is to take law enforcement out of it if it's any way possible. And speaking of taking a community approach, we have a question from a psychiatric nurse practitioner at the University of Texas Health Science Center at Tyler. And she works with a program called MAT, and it deals with substance use and mental illness. And what she wants to know is, which MAT stands for Medication for Addiction Treatment, when will our local residents, representatives, and justice system begin to implement MAT as an option for justice involved here in Smith County?
I'll let Ms. Graham answer that. That's one of the acronyms for her name. She's a substance abuse licensed counselor. Yes.
Well, yeah, I can't address to what is, as far as the criminal justice system's plan is for that, but we do know that in Smith County we need more resources for substance abuse treatment, and the Andrew Center has recognized that, and we're taking steps to move forward with that, and are looking to open up an outpatient substance abuse treatment unit most likely this fall. So a step in that, a MAT treatment, is where you combined an outpatient treatment setting with the medication. And so at this time, we're going to the first step of that, where we're getting the outpatient program set up. So there are providers in our community that do provide MAT, and the Andrew Center has met with the Texas Mood Organization, which is an organization that assists in setting up doctors, training doctors to prescribe those medications and providing the funding for those medications. So that is a process that's starting, but it's something that will be in the future directly for the Andrew Center anyway, but there are other providers already in Smith County that are doing that.
Thank you. I will also remind you that if you want to call in, our number is 1-866-899-4679. The access code is 152-353-781 if you have questions and would like to call them in. Our next question, and we basically kind of answered this one, it says, what about persons who refuse to take their medication? What can a family member do?
So I'll kind of jump in. If somebody's refusing to take their medication and they are experiencing psychotic episodes, the first thing that you do, unfortunately, I harped on not doing this earlier and wanting to move away from it,
Yep.
but in the mechanism that we have now is call law enforcement. They can go out, pick that person up, take them to the hospital. If they're meet the criteria for a civil commitment, we can move forward with the civil commitment process. And part of that process includes forcing the psychoactive medication. It is a judicial process, so we do have to meet certain guidelines. We have to have, there's due process hearings that have to occur on a strict timeline. So it's not a quick fix, but it is it's the only fix in the state of Texas that we can force someone to take their medication. So it is short of that. If someone is not taking the medication like they should be, I think the next step is talk to their provider. If it's the Andrew Center may not tell you. They may not say, because of HIPAA laws, they may not be able to say, okay, thank you, this is their diagnosis, but they may be able to say, thank you for giving that information. We weren't aware of that. We can address that. So I think that's another step that we can take short of calling law enforcement, and hopefully in the future we'll have other means to not have law enforcement be the sole mechanism by which we can get get that person to the hospital.
And
Commissioner
also-
Hampton?
Wait a minute.
What I was going to add was that we do have 2 certified crisis intervention training officers that can respond to these type of situations. We have 2 that work during the day and 2 that work during the night that are trained in these. They actually go to a separate training that are trained in these type of interventions where they can have a little bit more training than what the normal officer does in those type of situations that can handle that.
And how do they contact those CIT officers?
Whenever they call dispatch or when they call our 911 even, they would specifically ask for these trained deputies that are trained in those fields. If they're not available, they can be contacted by phone and do an interview or do something by phone for the deputy that is on scene for that individual.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Stewart?
Yes, Commissioner. Again, NAMI, which is National Alliance of Mentally Ill, there's a Tyler group. If you just hit NAMI on the website, Google it, it'll come up with the Tyler group. I strongly advise that people get in touch with them. If you follow the steps of Chief Mr. Wilson here, and you get your person into Andrews Center somewhere, maybe if it's even the state hospital, you're going to need some support and some ideas afterwards. And NAMI is a great, great, great support group, and they have a lot of training, I said earlier. So I'm sold on NAMI.
Okay. So our next question, when an officer makes a wellness call, what is the procedure, and whether it's PD or Smith County that makes the call, what do we do? What do you do when you do a wellness call? Pink, can you answer that for us?
Well, whenever I go out on a wellness call, I normally just kind of talk to the person to see how they're actually doing, to try to assess them as I talk to them. And I feel that person is going to be a danger to himself or others, then I'm going to do a emergency peace officer warrant and take them to the hospital for treatment. Matter of fact, Mr. Wilson, we were in court a while back, and a young man was displaying a certain behavior. And so I went and talked to him, and after talking to him, I could tell he was a little bit agitated, but it's actually what he said made everybody kind of think something was wrong. But after I talked to him and found out what was really going on, he wasn't having a problem. It was an issue at home, but it wasn't because of his medication. So what we want to do is talk to the individual to see what their mindset is, and if we feel they really need treatment, then we're going to take them to the hospital.
Okay, thank you. We're going to ask our caller to hit *6 if they would like to ask the question, to unmute themselves. Do we have someone on the line? Okay, so our next question is, how many inmates do we normally have in our Smith County Jail that's diagnosed with a mental illness?
Right now, our total population in our jail is 828 inmates. This morning it was 843. Usually we have approximately 200 inmates in our jail that have some type of mental illness. Valerie Holcomb keeps up with our stats there, and I have them here in my paperwork somewhere. And she does assessments on each one of these inmates daily, whether they're on suicide watch or whatnot. The average population is about 215 inmates that we have in our jail right now that have some form of mental illness. Now, out of these inmates, we have inmates that are that comply with medication. Most of these inmates that we have that are going through mental illness do not comply with their medication. Therefore, they get in a crisis situation in the jail, and that's one thing that we're trying to work for and work towards with the Andrews Center, with the crisis hotline, to try to get these inmates that need more help than what we can give them to beds where we can give them the help that they need.
Okay, in mentioning that, how is the issue of isolation and single cells being handled when you have patients with mental issues and you put them in an isolation cell, a single cell? How long do they stay there?
And I touched on that earlier. It's in reference to their behavior and the safety for other inmates, the safety and security of our jail. If they're a violent inmate, they could be in there for quite some time, because we don't want to expose any of our current inmates who's not violent inmates or anything like that to somebody that is violent and somebody that is going through a crisis. It's hard to it's a hard question to answer, being that we do have some inmates that are violent towards other inmates that have to be kept separate, and are in those cells during their duration of time that they're in Smith County.
Okay. And I know we've touched on this question, and we probably answered this question. It says, for those waiting, and this is off Facebook, it says, for those waiting in jail for a bed, what type of treatment is given to that inmate for the duration of the wait? So I'm assuming that we've talked to the Andrews Center, and we've have them on the type of medication that they would need. But if you could just answer that question.
Yes, ma'am. Usually, if they have been diagnosed with some type of mental illness, we have referred to the Andrews Center or.
Excuse 1 second. Hold your question for 1 second. Go ahead.
Or whatever other mental health facility they have received treatment to see what type of treatment they have received during their time outside of the Smith County Jail, and hopefully we're able to get them on some type of medication regimen to where we can curve their behavior with that type of medication to get them in compliance with the rules that we have there in the jail.
Okay, thank you. Caller, go ahead. If you will state your name, and if you're with an agency, tell us what agency. If not, if you're just an individual, that will be fine. Go ahead, caller. Unmute yourself with *6. Okay,
Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. I had a question for the prosecutor about the role of indigent defense and court-appointed counsel in cases of people with mental illness and or IDD.
Yes, ma'am. What specifically? What question do you have, or do you just a general?
What is the role? What is the role of the court-appointed attorney? What should they be doing? How does it work in the county? How do they coordinate with the jail and the Andrews Center and the prosecutor? Because we've had some experience of working some of these cases as participatory defense, and we've noticed that there are gaps between these three stakeholders. And so I'm just curious about what the role of indigent defense in your county is. What are they supposed to do in cases where people with mental illness and IDD are appointed as their clients?
So usually, and we have two ways in which an indigent defense attorney is appointed here in Smith County. We have, if it's a misdemeanor case, it goes through the criminal court's will, and so there are a certain number of individuals who are appointed through that program, and it's a will type program where they are selected by the judge. The second and the most prominent one that we deal with for a mental health related issue are the contract attorneys out of the felony courts. And so they're appointed on specific cases, and they have guidelines that are put out by the Office of Court Administration on how many cases they can take. But really, when it comes to the appointment of individuals who are mentally ill, appointment of attorneys for individuals who are mentally ill, those individual attorneys are, they know the process. They typically, when we get a 46B commitment for someone who is unable to assist in their defense, that is actually addressed by the defense attorney. That defense attorney will go out and meet with that person and sometimes meet with the family, and they will bring that issue up to the court and to the prosecutor. And there are many instances that I've been involved in where the defense attorney actually comes to me and says, hey, this guy has a problem. What can we do? And we talk about it, and we all agree that this person needs to, in fact, that's a vast majority of the cases, is that we want these people to be competent when we try them for the alleged offense that they have committed. So what we have to do as a prosecutor is, if at any point in time we see that this person is mentally ill, that we either, and it's affecting their ability to have due process rights, then we have to ensure that, one, they have a defense attorney appointed to them, and two, that they get the treatment so that they can proceed forward. So there is a collaborative effort between the court, between the defense attorney, and between the state. But we also have to work within the confines of the rules that we have to do that. So the defense attorney has ethical rules that he's bound by, or he or she is bound by. The state has ethical rules that we're bound by, and the court has rules that they're bound by. So we cannot work in a vacuum. We have to work together, but there are some instances where we just cannot, because the rules do not allow us, we cannot communicate certain information to each other. So hopefully that answers some of your question, but we have a great working relationship with the defense bar here locally, and the defense bar, even the ones who are appointed and who are not appointed, they know that when they need to when their client needs mental health treatment, that we can work together to get that done so that the courts are aware and so that they can get the treatment that they need.
Thank you, caller. I have two more questions.
Thank you.
What can the pastors or of congregations do to assist with these issues? And sometimes we're going to fall into HIPAA guidelines or something like that. So basically, their member would have to actually talk to the pastor to try to get some help. But if they're, say, in court and they need someone, can we call their pastors or the congregations, members of the congregation, if there's someone there?
So I think that is something that, you know, a family is going to have to step up and do that. But I will say this. Typically, well, not typically, but whenever the BHLT was created, and that's the Behavioral Leadership Team, people that were a part of that are pastors, and there are several pastors now, and they've actually created a curriculum for training other pastors to deal with mental illness in their community and inside their congregation, and they have pulled this training down, and it's not specific to a religion, so it can cross denominations, and you don't have to, you know, they will sit down and they will train other pastors. So I think that is one thing that is key, is getting family, friends, neighbors. If you do have someone who can benefit from a pastor who can go out and help this individual, then that's going to be, you know, the ones who can have that conversation are the ones who are both most intimately involved with that person.
Thank you. Our last question before I ask Ms. Murphy if she has any more questions from Facebook. It says, does the county have a coordinated plan with the police department and the DA's office on preventing rearrests and offering community-based mental health treatment? Mr. Wilson.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that one more time?
Does the county have a coordinated plan with the police department and the DA's office on preventing rearrests and offering community-based mental health treatment?
So I mentioned the AOT court. That is one way that we work together. I go out and Chief David Long, Chief Shoemaker, with Chief David Long with the Tyler Police Department, and Chief Shoemaker, we have done presentations before to the community about kind of the collaborative efforts, the BHLT, and I keep mentioning them because they're an important stakeholder in this process. They bring together all of the law enforcement, all the local law enforcement, Lindell PD, TJC PD, UT, Tyler PD, the Sheriff's Office, you name the law enforcement agency, they have been involved and they are involved in this process. So it is a collaborative effort. There is more that can be done, and we're working towards that. Hopefully, you know, this is a stepping stone so we can move forward and have more discussions and more conversations about what we need in the community.
Thank you. To wrap up, there is a lot of times that wives don't know what to do with husbands, and husbands don't know what to do for wives, and parents don't know what to do for their children. If someone is experiencing a manic episode, and not only that, but they have other comorbidities that may be also contributing to this, with like blood sugars that are elevated, or what, when they call in for help, do we automatically send a CIT officer, or do we just send a police officer to de-escalate the problem? anyone can take that call?
It's depending on the nature of the call. Depending on the nature of the call, and the information that they give to our dispatcher, who is going to dispatch the call, is bases on who they send to the call. If it's a medical concern or whatever, you had said something about somebody's blood sugar being out of balance. It's up to the nature of the call and how it comes across as a dispatcher. What relation is what information is relayed to the dispatcher, and what is passed on to the officer or the sergeants that's taking the call.
So, Mr. Pinkerton, were you going to say something?
He said what I was going to say. It's just so important that the person that's making the call give as much information that they can. If they know the person's diabetic, let them know it's diabetic. If they're not on their medication, they've been off it, let them know. And let them know that they are having treatment at the Andrews Center, because what they can do at the same time is maybe contact the crisis hotline to get a better understanding of what they're walking into. So the more information that a person can give to the 911 caller, the better off they are.
And Mr. Wilson, this part's going to be for you. So the person has been arrested, taken to jail, and now I want the DA to drop the charges. What happens, or can I even come back and say, please drop these charges?
So people can file what's called an affidavit of non-prosecution. That does not mean that we're not going to move forward with the case. We, as the DA's office, we have to take every case individually. So we don't just represent victims. We represent the community as a whole. So we represent the state of Texas. We want to see what is done is in the best interest of the victim. So in some cases, it may be that that individual goes into treatment, and we look at the case, and maybe they get some different form of punishment, such as deferred adjudication probation rather than regular probation. Sometimes, in our goal of seeking justice, the best way to seek justice is to dismiss the case. Sometimes it's not. So we have to weigh that balance. But what we don't want to do is make sure that every person's constitutional rights are guaranteed. Because at the beginning of this, I said my goal, my first and foremost duty is, as a prosecutor, to see that justice is done. And, if we're not guaranteeing everyone's constitutional rights, then we are not seeing that justice is done. And so that is why, in some cases, a dismissal may not be the most appropriate case, even where the victim doesn't want us to continue to prosecute.
Thank you. Okay, this is our last question. First of all, I want to thank everybody that was on Facebook that asked questions. We want to thank our caller that called in. And hopefully we've said something here tonight that will help some family member help their loved ones with mental health issues. Last question. What can families do for current inmates that committed their crimes while in the midst of a mental health crisis? Anybody? Okay, Thomas, it's yours.
I seem to be talking a lot on this panel
It's okay.
today,
You've done great. We thank you.
So what they can do if they believe that that either their loved one is not guilty because of their mental illness, or maybe they are guilty and they just want to see that they get the treatment that they need, is speak up. And they talk to their attorney. If they don't have an attorney, talk to the congregation, talk to their pastor, call the Andrews Center. Even though they may not be able to speak to you, they may be able to give you resources. Call NAMI. And in a general sense, not just in the criminal justice system, but in dealing with mental health as a whole, as a community, and Jennifer spoke on this earlier, everybody needs to speak up. This is not an issue that is going away. We're not going to get a vaccine in 18 months that is going to help everybody get herd immunity. Mental illness will be with us forever. And so if we don't speak up about it, we're going to continue to have these problems. And so that is the one thing, no matter where you are on the spectrum, is speak up and talk to your neighbors, talk to your friends, talk to your church members, talk to your elected officials. Talk to them constantly, and they will respond.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson.
You're
Thank you to everyone that participated in our panel today. We really do appreciate you. And please understand that mental illness is not a stigma. We are here to help you. Anyone on this panel, you can call at any time, and we will do whatever we can. Ms. Murphy, thank you so much for your help tonight. Thank you, gentlemen.